Okay, so we can get ready to talk. So let's talk about traditions. That's the topic that I chose for this week that I wanted to think about. And the reason for that is that we are entering into the worst part of the pandemic now. So for Thanksgiving a couple weeks ago, we had one friend over and we ate outside. Right, we were able to do Thanksgiving. Um, for me, it didn't feel all that traditional or really all that special. It was nice to be able to get together, but it didn't seem like it was really different. And I think Jennifer felt this the same way. So the next day, we do what we've always done. We've traditionally always done. That is to say, we put on Christmas music. We got out the Christmas lights. We brought down the Christmas tree. Um, we're pretty irregular about putting out the lights on like the house on the outside of the house. Like we've got a few, not a lot. Um, Most years lately, we've decided it's not worth the trouble and just decorate it inside. But this year, it felt like we needed to put some lights out there. So so here we are, two atheists listening to songs about the baby Jesus, and how we'll all be saved. And so it got me thinking a bit about the importance of these traditions because they're all going to be under pressure. Right now, we're entering what will probably be the worst part of the pandemic, and this has been really hard for me to emotionally process. I remember back to March when things started, and I, we were going to lock down at home for a couple weeks, like we got the food ready, and it really felt like there was something in the air that was dangerous and could hurt us, and that we needed to be careful. Um, at this point, I'm just not feeling it. I mean, I go out to shops when we go grocery shopping, and I wear my mask, and most people that I see are wearing their masks, but I just don't feel the danger that's out there. But that's at odds with the way things are. More people have the virus now than had it back in March, so there's more of it in our community. Our systems are increasingly stressed in different parts of the country where we're reaching limits. And there are all sorts of different kinds of limits. There's the number of beds, there's the number of doctors, there's the number of nurses, there's the need for people to take downtime and vacation. The exponential growth of the virus means that even if we aren't at capacity at this moment, over the next month or so, we're going to be at the worst part of the pandemic. We're going to need to be careful. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on our traditions. It's going to be very hard to do what we typically do during this holiday season. It's going to be hard to have the kinds of parties and get togethers that every office would have and that every group of friends would have. Even just exchanging presents, as so many people do, becomes a bit more difficult, like how you manage to get them to each other and meet them and all of that. So to me, that was a prime opportunity for us to start to reflect. We need to know why these traditions matter in order to know what to preserve and what we can change. Because a lot of times the way that we approach traditions is precisely without thinking about it. It's just, this is what we've done. This is what we've always done. Nobody raises any questions about it. But when you approach life that way, whether it's traditions or any other part of your life, when you approach your life that way, you don't necessarily understand why you're doing what you're doing. You don't know what's valuable about it. Or to make this sound even more grand, right? You're living an unexamined life rather than an examined life, that you're living thoughtlessly and moment to moment. You might do good things that way, but it's accidental. But if you examine your life and you examine your traditions, then you can do good things and you can do it deliberately and you can do it consciously and you can know that what you're doing is valuable. So let's think about traditions. Let's back up. Let's brainstorm a little bit about why they might be important and why they might be bad, and do sort of the traditional dialectic that I like to do, the examination back and forth. So humanists are usually critics of religion or of tradition, also of religion, but of tradition in particular. A lot of people who have adopted humanist attitudes do so precisely in the name of progress, that what we're going to do is overthrow the old ideas that were there and introduce the new ones that will take over. I think one of the most notable was the effort to create the religion of man, right? This was going to be one tradition that everybody's going to share. There's going to be one thing that everybody's going to have. And that way it can be universal, it can be broad. We can engage in this simply as humans. So traditions in that vision are something that divide us. They break us down into different groups, the people who do this and the people who don't do this, the thing we do around here and the thing that they don't do over there. And often the reasons for those divisions can seem pretty weak. I think one of the more amusing characteristics is to describe traditions as merely peer pressure from the past, right? It's just all the peers that were doing this before, and so we just do it now because that's the way it is. It's just that peer pressure from the past. Of course, that ignores the way that a lot of these traditions are an accumulation of power of different kinds, right? Christians often set their holidays on top of various pagan holidays as a way of taking over, right? Of saying, we are now in charge and you are not. So that's one way that it's been an accumulation of power. But in any group that sets up traditions, there are always, right, people that are able to exercise the power to get their versions and their things in place. And so maybe we might end up thinking these traditions really aren't very good. They're just ways that we hold on to this. Many traditions cover horrible values, ones that are exclusive or designed to oppress others. Um, so if you think politically, when you see claims about tradition, right, it's usually sorts of things defending the Confederacy and say, oh no, well, it's tradition in one way or another. Or if you think about efforts to restrict marriage, right, to one man and one woman, well, tradition will be the claim that gets brought out this way. So often when there isn't anything rational to say, people will hold tradition as a reason to keep some of these bad values. One of the more sort of interesting things that sociology has found is that a lot of traditions stem from exclusion first and not the other way around. That is, two groups adopt these identities of being opposed to each other and therefore convert whatever differences they might have into traditions. So it's not that these two groups are different, they have different values or different ways of conducting themselves to begin with. They'll start to conduct themselves differently precisely because they're opposed, right? Because they're part of these groups. I think football teams, this is easy to see, right? Where they develop these hostilities and the rivalries, and that feeds into traditions of different things that they say or that they do. Um, with exclusion coming first, which really gives us not much to cling to. I know for many of us that are humanists, one of the biggest problems with traditions around this time of year is that simply we don't believe what these traditions seem to be claiming. I mean, for myself, I do enjoy putting on Christmas music this time of year. It changes the feel of things. But if I listen to a lot of the songs with the things that they describe, they can vary. I mean, some of them are general ideas that I can believe in, but other ones, particularly the ones about Jesus and our Savior coming, I just don't. I simply do not believe in those things. And so sometimes it can feel like I'm being a hypocrite listening to this or paying attention to this. All right. So, with all of that, we might suspect there isn't anything good about traditions at all. And there certainly are people who take that position, say traditions are terrible and they all need to go. But I want to spend a little time brainstorming what might be good about them. Like, would we really be better off if we just got rid of all of our traditions? So, one way traditions might be good is that we make meaning by what we do and what we do not do, right? That is, in order to make my life meaningful, I have to have a certain kind of integrity about things that I simply would not consider, would not do, that I try to restrain myself from doing. To me, one of the more vivid examples came in a book, Jonathan Safran Foer's, about his Jewish grandmother running away from the Nazis and starving. And people would help now and then, and they give them food, and sometimes they would give them pork. And even when they were starving, she wouldn't eat it. And he asked her why, and she said, "Well, if I do that, then there's nothing left." That is, the thing she was trying to save, her Jewishness along with herself, right, would have been destroyed. I think about that applying to me in much more minor ways in terms of even just gardening out in the front yard, right? I take time to care for these plants. I take time to decide that I want these plants to live and not those plants. I pull out the other ones. I take time to prepare the soil for them. It's thriving matters to me, which means that I have to restrain myself in a lot of ways. Like some mornings, I don't feel like it. It's too cold. I don't want to be out there. But I organize my desires, right, around this other goal. The meaning of this activity, right, is being shaped by the way that I restrain myself and don't just do whatever I feel like, but organize it in a particular way. And that's another thing for me, right, that the Christmas music ends up doing. If we want to think about how it might connect, we don't listen to it until after Thanksgiving. We restrain ourselves, whether we want it or not, right? It's confined to this location in time and space. As a way of making it meaningful, of indicating someplace that we are. Another feature that traditions can do is they can help us connect to the world, to each other, and to particular values, because we connect to each other in a very specific way rather than in a very general way. Even as humanists, I think when we want to try to identify with humanity as a whole, or if we want to try to identify with love in general, or justice in the abstract, it's hard. It is difficult to get as emotional, as to develop as much feeling when you're thinking about it that broadly. Traditions are specific. They're particular days of the year, right? Or they're particular times of the year. They're particular orders of doing things. And this kind of specificity helps us get engaged with it, not just leave it as an abstraction that isn't part of our life. We talked about this some last week with Katie when talking about love, right? We could talk about love in the abstract, but most of the time when we want to talk about love, we're talking about loving a very specific person, right, in very specific ways. And that evokes more emotion and more connection. I think this is why many of these attempts to create universal traditions for everybody ends up failing. Like we need local traditions, whether you want to be talking about Texas or Florida or Louisiana, right? We need local traditions of a certain kind. We need family traditions that are particular to our families. We need national traditions, perhaps. We certainly have those when it comes to things like Thanksgiving. So yeah, we connect to people in a more specific way via these traditions than we really are able to if we just try to engage the general ideas, even when those general ideas are important. The last thing I want to say is traditions then take us through that specific and help us connect with other people. So one of the things that's nice, right, about celebrating Christmas, even as an atheist, right, one thing that I find nice about celebrating Christmas is that so many other people are doing it as well. That around us, it really is a time that things change for all of us. So there's something, pressure back against the point I was making last time, right? There's something more universal about it. It's more open. It bridges us to other people. And that holds, I think, as long as this is a tradition that you grew up with, that you connect to, that in some ways means something to you. It helps us reach out to all do this at the same time in roughly the same ways, in roughly the same songs. I think it'd be a very different world if everybody I knew listened to totally different songs at the holidays at totally different times. So what does that imply for this year? What does that suggest for how we should think about our traditions? First thing I think that is important is traditions are therefore not fixed and inflexible. Like if what we are trying to do is develop a pattern, right, that goes beyond our immediate wants and desires, if what we're trying to do is connect with these values in the specific rather than the abstract, and we're trying to bridge and do it with other people, we can keep those things in mind and change a lot of other parts. Yes, physical proximity would be nice, but this year it's dangerous. So other patterns might hold. For us, that ultimately ends up being why we put up the Christmas lights this year. We wanted to hang out the Christmas lights. I don't look forward to getting on the roof. I don't enjoy that. I don't look forward to climbing up the ladder. But it's important for us to look up and down our block this year and see these lights here and there and just think about people who I know I disagree with about many other things, people who I know I connect to in other ways. See all of us carrying out this tradition to show ways that we might be connected. I think it's a very human thing to do. So I put up Christmas lights, a holiday of a religion I've never celebrated, but certainly a big part of my culture. Um, so let's talk about ways we might preserve our traditions or change our traditions or alter our direction um, this year in response to this pandemic.